All right, it seems like we're going live. What's good, everybody? I'm the G with a PhD, and you're tuned in to the Green Gorilla channel, the place where black men can express themselves freely, straight up, no chaser. Please make sure to like and to share the videos and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. So today, we have a special guest on the Green Gorilla channel. We have a scholar that goes by the name of Dr. Tommy J. Curry. Now, before I begin to have any conversation with Dr. Curry, I'm going to give you a little bit of insight about his background. So currently, Tommy J. Curry is in the philosophy department at the University of Edinburgh. His research interests are in Africana philosophy and the Black radical tradition. His areas of specialization are 19th century ethnology, critical race theory, social political theory, and Black male studies. He's the author of The Man Not, Race, Class, Genre, and the Dilemmas of Black Manhood, which was published by Temple University Press in 2017. Also, The Man Not has won the American Book Award. He's the author of Another White Man's Burden, Josiah Royce's Quest for a Philosophy of Racial Empire, which was published by SUNY Press in 2018. He's also republished the forgotten philosophical works of William Ferris as the Philosophical Treatise of William H. Ferris. He's also the editor of the first book series dedicated to the study of Black males, entitled Black Male Studies, a series exploring the paradoxes of racially subjugated males, which is published by Temple University Press. He's currently working on a co-edited anthology on contemporary African American philosophy entitled Where Do We Go From Here on Bloomsbury Publishing. And the list just goes on and on and on. But also, I want to congratulate Dr. Curry on being recognized by Diverse as one of the top 15 emerging scholars in the United States, even though it's a little bit dated. But congratulations for that, by the way. So I want to welcome Dr. Curry to the channel. What's good, my brother? How you doing, man?
I'm making it, brother. Just trying to stay warm out here.
Just trying to stay warm out here. Before we did a cut to going live, we were talking about how the weather is down there. So let everybody know what the differentiation is between the weather in Scotland and what it's like here in the United States. So it's what's the temperature, man? What's the degrees?
I think it's like 57 or 58 degrees today.
Is
This is good summertime weather in Scotland.
it?
Yeah. But I think the biggest difference is in Scotland you could have all the seasons in one day. So you could start sunny, it'll start raining, and it'll get cold, and the sun will come back out. So yeah, the weather here changes every day.
Okay. I want to give a shout out to Kendra from the Crimson Cure. I want to give a shout out to TRN Eric DePrince. I want to give a shout out to Minis Aptara. Just a few people that we have in the chat right now. And so, man, look, we were talking about, like the kind of things that are available to Black people in Scotland. One of the things being clippers, right?
Right, yeah.
So it's hard to find hair care products and stuff like that in Scotland.
Yeah, for the most part, I mean, the cool thing with Scotland is Amazon pretty much gives everything to your door within the same day. So
Really?
I've been able to order, yeah. So some of the stuff they have in London, I'm able to get here really, really quickly. But yeah, it was hard finding some wall clippers, and I think they were in London or they were in Germany, and there was a sale on it for like 80 pounds, so I scooped up a pair.
Damn, 80 pounds. Well,
Yeah,
that's like almost like 100 some odd bucks, ain't it?
yeah. I mean, because in the States, I think you could get like, because this was the legend ones, the
Okay.
maroon and silver. So I think you get that in the States for like what, 60, 70 bucks?
I think
Maybe.
65 is like 65 bucks to 80 bucks is like a
Yeah. So yeah. I mean, with the exchange rate, but it wasn't too bad.
For sure. So yeah, the last time I saw you was here in the good old state of Texas.
Yeah,
Good old the good old state. We say that with a degree of sarcasm, but yeah, man. Another thing I know you love, man, is sushi.
Love sushi.
So like, Can you readily find that
I
in
can. I
Scotland?
can. The seafood here is excellent.
Oh, straight up?
Excellent. Yeah, yeah. So sushi combines my two favorite things, rice and fish. So you can't go wrong. I mean, I'm from Louisiana. What can I say?
Right.
Um, but no, I mean the sushi here is fantastic. They don't make sushi the same way. Like the rolls aren't as complicated, and they don't use as much sauce. But in terms of the quality of the fish, it's fantastic, unbelievable.
Yeah, I know you know because I've
Oh
seen
yeah,
you smash rolls.
I can. Yeah, I have a very developed palate for sushi.
Yeah, yeah. I'll just stick with the California roll, man. I know that's
It's all good, brother. No judgment. No judgment.
What about other food, man? Like, I'm pretty sure they don't have barbecue like they have here in Texas.
No, but actually, I've been doing a bit of barbecuing myself. My wife has demanded that she wanted some home cooked meats grilled, so I've been grilling stuff myself for the last 3 or 4 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Well,
we can make do. We don't have brisket. I don't have a smoker, but they got a grill where we stay. So I've been fixing up things. That's pretty much like home. The biggest difference is that in the UK, or maybe it's just Scotland, they don't use chuck for their hamburgers. So like you go in the store in America, buy some ground chuck, 80/20, and
right.
cook you a nice burger. Here they put all parts of the cow in their ground beef. So
Oh
you have to go to a
no.
butcher and say that you actually want chuck or shoulder steak. They call it shoulder steak here. And then you can make a good hamburger. But if you're in the UK, do not eat their hamburger. It's a mistake. It shouldn't. It we bought some ground beef, and my wife cooked the burger for the family, and I was like, "What is this? What's happening right now?"
Right.
Yeah, we did not like it at all. But we've been going to a butcher. The butchers actually deliver here, so they've been dropping off a weekly supply of nice ground chuck for us. It's ribeye steaks, so it's pretty good.
Yeah, I remember the first time I went to a Texas barbecue joint, man. You took me somewhere. I can't remember where it was, man, but it had
Yeah,
to be
yeah,
somewhere.
yeah,
Yeah, that's exactly where it was. And look,
yeah,
I can't recall exactly. Was it the philosophy born the struggle having a meeting
yeah,
at yeah
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So I took everybody out for barbecue, and then we did sushi for the closing dinner of the conference.
Okay, yeah, man. Good times, brother. Good times. But
Yeah, man, I try to treat everybody with a little Southern hospitality.
yes, sir. Yes, sir. Um, Another thing that I wanted to talk to you about, it just kind of slipped my mind, but
Yes.
yeah, I'll come back to it if my memory loops back where I wanted to. But so, how's your wife, man, and your daughters, man? Tell her hello,
Oh,
by the way. I
I
haven't.
will. I will. No, everybody's doing really great, man. Since we've moved here, it's been so different than the United States. I think our work has been able to take off. My wife's doing great things with COVID-19. She's one of the lead researchers on health disparities and racism and racial inequality in the Usher Medical School here. I've been extremely productive working on getting a curriculum together to decolonize the university curricula and starting a center. I think overall it was just a fantastic move. I love the colleagues, love the university. It's just been all positive.
That's awesome, man. Because I was going to ask you, having two black girls and being in, a place that you've never been before, like how were they adjusting to life, in Scotland, and like
Yeah.
what language is English the primary language in Scotland?
Yes, English is the primary language, but their English is very different than our English. You know? I have real trouble with the Scottish and the Polish accents. The Irish accents get me too sometimes, depending. But I can usually understand people from the South, so from London. But the farther up north you go, the more difficult it is. The thicker the accent, But
Right,
we're getting used to it, man. It's a bit of an inconvenience because of they use different words and different slang, and it's very different to get the inflection. Like I don't, it's hard to understand the intonation of
right.
of Brits, because you can't really tell if they're ever making a joke, or you can't read it that way like you can in America. So that's been taking a little bit of time. But otherwise, it's been great. The girls love it here. They enjoy school. One of the advantages of getting a Scottish education is that the focus of the school is to make your children good people. So it's not like America where you're checking off boxes for tests. They're teaching them basic skills and competence that they should have at every grade or age level, but they're focused on very, very different lessons, multicultural education, civic responsibility. These are the types of things that are integrated. Lots of playtime, lots of interaction with other children. These are the kinds of things that they do within the classroom. That's vastly different than what we got in the United States.
Interesting that you mentioned that because, I mean, we can talk about black boys and their
Mhm.
experience in, American education. And it is, the kind of educational system where you just have to, like you said, check off boxes.
Yeah,
And I think, one of the drawbacks to the American style of education is that like black boys can't get up and get around in the classroom. They can't play
no,
and
no,
get that energy off, or kind of expend some energy and work interactively. Instead they're
yeah,
just like, it's like a church style education system where you're supposed to sit in ranks and files, and you're supposed to learn by being
yeah.
obedient and just doing what you're told. So yeah, that's
Yeah,
interesting.
and look, man, I'll be very honest. I always had good grades, but I was constantly attacked in the education system about my character, about being called a troublemaker, and largely didn't even do anything. You know, but this was the perception that white teachers and some black teachers had of black boys in general. You know,
Right.
so I went to schools. I would start off in Catholic school, and then in primary school, I moved to a predominantly white magnet school. But despite, having some of the best grades in my class and within my age group, constantly making honor roll and banner roll, there's this perception that there was something deviant about me. I was just treated worse than the other students, and treated worse than my female counterparts, right? When
Right.
I got to high school, I was one of two black men in the advanced classes. So this is a class of 30, and everyone in those classes were women except for two black boys, right? So looking back on the education system, it becomes really, really startling that when you get into the academy, people can make the kinds of arguments they make about black men and boys or about the education system. Like I'm absolutely thrilled for my girls. We're constantly watching, the kinds of stereotypes they put on our daughters. But even the types of issues we've had where people suggested that they weren't motivated, never turned to deviance. And I think that was the major difference in my experience, even versus the things that I've dealt with my daughter, my two girls.
Yeah, we're gonna definitely talk about black men and deviance.
Yeah. Yeah.
But speaking of that, but before we tackle that issue, because you just recently wrote an article and you sent it to me, and I had time to read it, and
I hope you enjoyed it.
oh man, I loved it. Some of the things that you spell out there, to me, quite frankly, are they're alarming. But
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't want to start there though. I want to start with this recent piece that you wrote for the conversation
Hmm.
with one of your colleagues,
Yeah. Dr.
Shervin.
Sorry.
Yeah, Dr.
Yes.
Shervin Asari, who's
Hmm.
an associate professor of family medicine at Charles Drew University of Medicine and Science. And so, what? How did you happen upon Dr. Shervin Asari, and what led you all to collaborate with one another in order to put out this piece here?
Well, I was just a tremendous fan of his work. I think I reviewed a few of his pieces a few years ago, and he was looking at health disparities and diminishing returns on black males. So I do a lot of reviews sometimes for public health journals, uh, specifically on black men and boys. But I just kept running across this name and this work, and I read things and it would quote him, and so I reached out to him on Twitter one day and just told him, like, look, I really do like your work. I think it's really refreshing someone taking such a serious empirical focus on black men and boys as they move up through the economic ladder. I think a lot of the arguments that come about from black men is that, well, black men tried hard and black men were successful, then they would fit into society. There's very much this kind of pull yourself up the bootstraps narrative for black men
Hmm.
because black women dominating so many educational and employment opportunities and fields compared to black men. And they're like, well, if you tried hard, right? If you tried like black women tried, then you would reap the benefits. But all the data suggests otherwise. It suggests that when black men actually do get into environments like CEO positions, like the work of Robert Livingston, even black men projecting confidence or our expertise is seen as a serious threat to white people. They're constantly dock negative points for it. When you look at the evidence coming out of just threat constructions and soft skills with jobs, so even college educated black men are thought not to be proficient in talking to clients or to be overly aggressive and threatening. And while black women certainly suffer under some of those stereotypes of being angry, when you compare a black woman and a black man and they're competing for the same job, those attributes of black women being, aggressive or independent, et cetera, become positives in the minds of white employers, compared to what they have to deal with black men. So the idea is that, well, because black men are weak men or because black men don't take care of their children, that's why black women have to be strong and independent. So those things become pluses when employers are comparing black men to black women. So it's really, really complicated and nuanced to talk about black men in economic or educationally high educational required positions. And I think Asari's work just does a tremendous job breaking down that stereotype and saying, look, even when black men check all the boxes and do everything that society says they should do, ultimately they're not rewarded. They don't get the health benefits. They don't get the decrease in allostatic load. They face higher levels of overt discrimination over a 30-day period compared to their female counterparts. There's so many things about black male experience that people in the United States just don't want to confront, largely because I think it sets back their ideology of progress. On the other hand, I don't think that it's compatible with the feminist ideology in the academy, because it really does show that black men are disadvantaged more than their female counterpart in lots of different institutions and lots of different spaces. So, I just appreciate Asari's work. I reached out to him and we started collaborating.
That's great, man. Um, it's really startling this research because, I mean, as you progress or matriculate through the system, and you do what you're supposed to do, what the system announces you're supposed to do, and you become successful. You would think that there would be an attendant level of well-being that you would experience, but that's just not the case.
No,
and
it's not the case for black men.
and
It's just so hardly not the case.
So depression is the outcome. It's like that puts as a black man, that puts you in between a rock and a hard place, because
very literally, yes.
You're being told that you need to attain a certain level of proficiency in order to be rewarded, in order to be perceived as someone who's not pathological, right? Because mostly black men are perceived as criminal and pathological. So when you do what you're supposed to do, you still don't receive any benefits, you know?
Yeah. I mean, you'll receive some compared to lower class black men, but they're far. That's why they're called diminished. They're not the same as the benefits that other groups, including black women in some cases, receive. And you got to remember that the research also. My wife does the research on black women. Black women also experience diminishing returns. It's just that when you compare black men to black women, black men receive far less benefits for their education and their social mobility than their female counterpart. That's largely because of the anti-black misandry that black men experience institutionally and culturally throughout the United States. American institutions were designed to keep black men out of them. Unlike other groups, black men, because of their stereotype of criminality, deviance, and sex myths like the rapist, aren't allowed to go in and out of educational or even co-ed institutions the same way other groups are. So that puts a huge burden on how black men can actually mediate and how they have to deal with some of the most just violent and vicious stereotypes about their character. So all that together combines for a toxic mix that affects mental health, blood pressure, anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts, etc. And if I'm being quite honest with you, I was working on a piece looking at black male productivity and philosophy departments. And I think that a major explanation for why the most published people in black philosophy are all men really does kind of shine on this idea that black men never get the kind of respect or reception in the field relative to the amount that they produce, or even to their position or station. So when you look at black males who are cited in the discipline, black male citations compared to their white counterparts are far lower, even though black men are often more senior and far more productive than their white counterparts across the board and across different areas.
Yeah, I noticed you had some sentiments to express along those lines about Charles Mills, right?
Yes, yes, I think that I'm just very vocal about that. I think that Charles is arguably the premier black philosopher in the United States, if not the Western world. And while people constantly cite the racial contract, that book gets around 100 citations per year. His other works in radical Caribbean philosophy, his analytic stuff on Marxism, his stuff that deals wholeheartedly with white supremacy never gets cited. So what you have are white people who engage Mills primarily on the racial contract, even though that's one of the least radical positions that he's actually taken, but it's a position that can be co-opted into their own work. So you're not really fully appreciating the work of Mills. You just know Mills for the kinds of things that's compatible with white liberalism, white philosophical traditions, etc. Now, on the other hand, when you look at white philosophers are respected across the whole gambit of their career, so to speak. You see white philosophers from Judith Butler, Chomsky, all the social political people that you could think about are read across their careers. Black people, especially black men, are certainly not read across their careers. You cherry pick the era or the writing that you want to deal with. And we see this even with historical figures like W.B. Du Bois. People constantly read the essays like The Conservation of Race from 1897, and we have tons of literature in philosophy debating what does he actually mean, even though nobody knows 19th century ethnology. It's just not that deep of a work. But nonetheless, that becomes the focus. His stuff that he's writing from the 40s all the way to his death in the 1960s, nobody talks about because it's extremely radical. It's extremely against white supremacy. He's directly indicting American democracy, white people, etc. But nobody reads that. They're much more interested in the connections between Hegel and his ideas that make him seem somewhat sympathetic to the American liberal project.
I want to go back and then I want to come back to this, right?
Sure.
But what I want to go back to is the amount of depression that black men face as they ascend the socioeconomic ladder. And I just want to bring out a case in point. There was recently a black man who was appointed to the chief of some division in Chicago. And that man just killed himself, right? Or so they say. So if it's the case that achievement leads to higher levels of depression, what's the solution, Dr. Curry? Like, what's good? I mean, you can keep it straight on the chaser here, man.
No, look, I mean, this is one of the reasons I'm trying to get my master's of public health. I think we need better understandings of black men's existence in white societies as a public health endangerment, like it's a public health issue. There is something wrong with how white societies treat black men, and until we get a social work and mental health focus on what's killing black men, and that means involving clinicians, psychologists, etc., we're not going to be able to solve this problem. This is not a think yourself free kind of issue. It's not an existential issue. I get so frustrated when philosophers give me this kind of BS, like, oh, the existentialism, or that's not the issue. The issue is we can trace and track things like premature aging, telomere rates of reproduction. We could trace, Asari's doing this really interesting work looking at brain scans, high blood pressure. There's so many different things that emerge, even amongst socially mobile black men compared to their white and female counterparts. That this is, I think, a clarion call for scholars to be serious about what's affecting this group. Unfortunately, I don't think there's just a one answer because we haven't done the kinds of research necessary to figure out any kind of policy or programmatic changes that would actually solve this problem. One of the reasons that I think Black Belt Studies is so important is that it combines the theoretical with the empirical. So it's actually trying to give normative and programmatic solutions to these problems across a whole gambit of things. That's not to say that there hasn't been work in education, psychology, et cetera, that's tried to answer these questions, but it hasn't been done at a programmatic level to explain why the situations Black men are in the United States, are in universities, are in various interracial spaces, creates the kind of anxiety and endangerment that needs to be solved with specific policies tailored to their bodies and their experience. But the first thing that we have to get rid of the myth that education and social uplift is going to solve Black men's problems. That's not the case. And we have to get rid of this idea that there's something wrong with their masculinity that causes this. The stuff that's coming out of Bell Hooks' work, that many of the arguments are based upon, are nothing more than mythology that reiterate, false narratives started in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s about poor white men, and then made its way into explain racialized men's, rates of violence and their disengagement from society. We have to use
Curry, slow down. I don't want you to let the cat out of the bag too early, bro. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, my bad. But but I'm just saying,
we're gonna get there. We're gonna get there, brother. We're gonna get there. But I want to go back, just not far back, but I want to ask you a question, right? Because sure. I have this problem as well, right? I started off in philosophy, and it was a great discipline. I thought, and because it allowed you to be critical, and I mean, as a philosopher, you're supposed to be able to question everything, right? And I think that there are limitations to the discipline of philosophy. But before I even talk about those limitations, I want to talk about like what made you interested in doing philosophy in the first place? Like what brought you there? And then when you got there and you attain, your PhD, and you start working in the discipline, and you start meeting people, and you start, actually doing the work commensurate with attaining tenure and gaining acclaim in the discipline, like, at what point do you kind of lose your enchantment with it? I mean, because we already know going into it, it's pretty much white. You know what I'm saying? So that's one reason it could be disenchanting to begin with. But still, there was something that lured you into it to begin with, even though it is or was predominantly white, right? But what got you started off in the discipline to begin with?
Well, I was a debater, so I was reading philosophy since I was about 12. And because I used to cut the cards, like back in the day, you had to photocopy books and cut the cards, so you were just taught to read lots of things. So highly abstract and theoretical work was just something that drew me to it, right? I was able to do it from a young age. And of course I got better. I wasn't saying I was like, some savant or anything, but I understood it. Like I was able to read it. And I became interested in the arguments of critical legal studies, critical race theory. I was reading Marxism and socialism, social industrial unionism, freaking my parents out because I was ordering, socialist magazines that came to the house.
Right. They thought you was going to be like an Antifa, a black Antifa member or something.
Well, yeah, back then. I mean, I think back then the issue was like they were worried that the government was going to track us, But that's the stuff that I enjoyed. Like I enjoyed radical literature. I enjoyed thinking about these larger problems of economics, political economics. Then I got into critical race theory, and I enjoyed ideas from a very, very young age. So it seemed natural to me when I went to college on a debate scholarship that I would become a philosopher. But I like data, I like facts. So I ended up going to college, getting degrees in like political science, philosophy. I took tons of psychology classes, had a minor in Black studies. I enjoy stuff. I enjoy that kind of putting theory and data together. So for me, it was just really easy. I think my problem came about when I started going through grad school and I saw the dynamics of the discipline. Because, I'm like a really quiet kind of person. Like if you put me in grad school, they say do X. They gave me 22 books to read. I read all the books, wrote a paper, and I was done. So I didn't get I'm first generation of working class. I didn't get the etiquette, the smoozing and the going out to dinners and sucking up to professor kind of thing that I think was required in a lot of these programs. I came from a place where it was just hard work. But after I started moving through, I started seeing the kind of discrimination that Black people received, that Black professors were talked down to. They were taught, when I was at DePaul, people referring to critical race theory as the ghetto of philosophy. It's these types of things that make you sit back and say, well, hold up. And then there's this expectation, I think, in philosophy, even in the discipline, that Black men are supposed to be quiet.
Yeah, man.
So there's the Black men who are accepted and called nice are the Black men who are quiet and never question white people or feminists or never push back. And the Black men who push back are called arrogant, aggressive, etc. So I've watched, and I've been in the discipline for like 10 years now. So I've watched Black women get up and call people out for whatever. Nobody says anything negative. I've seen white women do it. I've seen white men do it. All these different groups have called people out, got into verbal altercations at conferences. And I just sit back and look because that's just not my personality. If you're gonna have an argument, we're gonna have an argument, and then after we get through the argument and you feel bad, then we could talk about it. But I'm not. I just think that you should be professional at all times. But what I realize is that that's not the issue at all. The issue is if black men step out of their place in the field, meaning if you disagree with a white woman, if you disagree with a white man, if you disagree with a feminist, then somehow people get to character assassinate you, right? And
Right.
that's what kind of made me disenchanted because I was like, this is bullshit. This is so I publish more than all the people that question me, and then the people who don't read it all get to determine I'm a bad person because we have different points of view. And
Right.
I'm more than welcome. It's like, well, look, if you want to write an article on something and give it to me and we debate it out, but they don't want to do that, right?
But
They want a kind of liberal. It basically philosophy for the most part is liberal white politics telling black people the range of things they could believe, and when you step out of that, people get upset. So I have no interest in having conversations with people who can't really talk to me, and I don't feel like being lectured to at this point in my career. So I think it's best that I just write my material, engage when people ask me to, and otherwise live a happy life.
yeah, so you're not interested in the engagement anymore. I
No,
look.
yeah,
I mean, you do want the engagement, but if the engagement is not going to be genuine and it's going to be a whole bunch of ideological mumbo jumbo with some bullshit going back and forth, like what's the point in getting into that kind of exchange? Because you're going to end up looking like the bad guy anyway. You know what I'm
well,
saying?
yeah, and I mean, I don't mind looking like the bad guy anymore. But for when I was younger in my career, it actually bothered me because I couldn't understand why, like I was in this one conference where I read a paper on Du Bois, and this white woman literally got up shaking, yelling at me, right? And she was like, "Well, this is just da 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 da," and you were just misreading. I was like, "I'm not misreading it. This is what Du Bois says. You're wrong." And you know me for years. That's basically how I talk.
Right,
You're wrong. I
right,
don't. You can feel how you want to feel about it, but here's the quote. What you're saying is wrong, right? Period.
right.
But I think that when black men, and again, like I said, I mean, I went through a debate career. I debated for like 10 years of my life. For me, it's about the argument. Like so I don't go to philosophy conferences and not research a paper or not research or know my field, right? I'm one of the few people in the world that study 19th century ethnology. So if you're going to argue with me about something I've written, God knows, like over a dozen articles about, you should know something about it. And the reality of the situation is most of the white philosophers that claim to be interested in race don't know anything. Most of the black people that say that they study race don't know anything. And that again, I've written an article about that on under specialization. And the reason for it partly is neglect, right, and derelict. But the other part of it is that, well, nobody's really checking to see if you're an expert when you claim a specialization in black philosophy. You can literally take all white courses, then come out and start talking about your experience or read one essay from Du Bois, and you can present yourself to white departments who know absolutely nothing about race at all as if you're an expert. And nobody's going to question you because nobody wants to be perceived as racist. So what that means is you have people who are analytically trained or trained in other continental traditions that were not trained to do or write in Africana traditions, competing with you as if they're experts automatically just because they're black. And I think
Yeah,
early in my career, I would get into lots of arguments with people where they would say, "Oh, well, Du Bois says that." So that's not what Du Bois says. I mean, I remember I had one argument where a guy was trying to tell me that the conservation of races in 1897 should be read this way. I was like, that makes absolutely no sense. And we were going back and forth. So I was like, look, this is a historical argument, not a philosophical one. Alexander Crummell asked Du Bois to write an essay on the current and most up-to-date ethnology and anthropology of the time. He did. Then he wrote a letter saying, "Oh, Du Bois, great job for writing that." I was like, this tells you the context, right? Du Bois admits this is the context. I don't see a point about arguing about something just to argue about it. That's not scholarship. That's not interesting to me. Now, if you have evidence for a certain reading, that's fine. But I think that what black philosophy has been reduced to in the academy is often arguing about a range of positions that are compatible with white people's worldview or liberal leftist ideology.
yeah. I've seen that. Like, one of the recent, one of the recent examples of this is another Tommy. You know, he was at a conference. Tommy Shelby, not Tommy Shelby was at a conference, and he makes a claim that I think it was centered around reproduction and whether or not you actually have a moral duty not to reproduce in the kind of conditions that exist or obtain in the ghetto.
Yes,
I think that was the argument, right? So it's like, okay, the ghetto is all fucked up, it's screwed up. What's the point of having a kid? You shouldn't be having a bunch of babies in this kind of environment because you're probably going to, introduce into the world some children who are going to have a terrible experience, and then they're not going to experience well-being or,
sure.
or flourishing. But then the question became, well, who are you to tell women what they should be able to do? So then it became ideological as opposed to actually exploring what the argument was about. It became you infringed upon the territory of feminism and this main talking point about who is and who's not supposed to be able to control reproduction. And so,
Yeah.
prior to that time, this guy was like one of the it boys, right?
Yeah, look, I remember back in the day I wrote an essay about Tommy Shelby's interpretation of Delaney. I didn't know him at the time. I had just read the book, but every conversation I've had with Tommy Shelby has been top-notch professional and just above level. So given my interaction with him over the last few years, I don't think his argument was malicious at all. But I think that Tommy makes arguments based on how he reads data and analytic questions he wants to flesh out. And insofar as he did that, I don't think that anyone has a right to say that he can't ask those questions, regardless of how you feel about it. Right. And I think again, this is an example of what I mean by the kind of the narrowness that our field deals with. He's a Black person living in Black communities and asks the question. If is actually in his book, he fleshes out pretty well, in my view. He asks, are there more responsibilities that poor Black women have to not reproduce if they don't have the economic or, I guess, cyclical means to take care of certain children? And he's not making an argument saying they can't. He's saying, look, we should consider these things, right?
Right.
I don't see what's wrong with that. I guess I personally wouldn't make that argument because I know how white people in the field would use that argument. But I don't think that's an argument out of bounds if you have other conferences where Black feminists are arguing, oh, well, we should bring guns to rallies because Black men are violent, right? We have to protect, it's like who gets to draw the line? If he's asking an analytic question about the moral duty one has to reproduction or children, and then the other people are like, well, we think Black men are rapists and murderers, so let's talk about arming ourselves against them in protest. You've kind of expanded the boundary of whatever could be asked.
Man, that what's funny about that, man. Look, put it this way, dude. You're at the protest primarily because of the death of a Black male, but then you need to have a gun to protect you from the Black male who's dead. Exactly. That's some crazy ass shit, dude. I'm just keeping it 100 with you. That is crazy as a motherfucker, man.
This is the ideology of our field, right? And that's what I mean. Like, this is the horrible racist tropes are allowed if you give them the title of feminist analysis or gender theory, etc. So look, you can do or ask, you're supposed to be able to ask practically any question. I don't see what's wrong with people actually pursuing genuine intellectual curiosity, but to start masking politics as intellectual results in production, I don't find anything useful about that. I mean, liberals and leftists do, but I don't. Because all you do is say that people that disagree with you are immoral people. You're not actually investigating anything. It's just ideology. If you don't agree with my ideology or my identity, you're a bad person. So that's not research. I care about research.
Yeah, I think that's the problem, that we're having on the left right now. I mean, because if you say something that falls outside of the line of the talking points with a certain set of people from grievance studies, all of a sudden you get typecast as being a misogynist, a transphobe, a homophobe, or a whole bunch of other phobes. And then the next thing you know, oh man, you're violent.
And that's what it always goes back to.
Like, dude, we're asking questions. Like, as far as I'm concerned, if you're an intellectual, nothing should be off the table. And if the argument is a bad argument, let the forceless force of the better argument, win the day. Come back and offer a counter argument. And then after that shit, go have a beer, man, or whatever the fuck. Go get some sushi.
I agree. And see, this is the thing. It's that, I completely support the rights of Black men, Black women, etc. But the minute that you disagree with something like, Black women should arm themselves or, any kind of argument, then it becomes, oh, well, you must hate everybody of that group. And it's completely illogical, right? It's completely illogical that because I disagree with your notion of black male privilege, which has been disproven by every empirical science we have practically the last 30 years, that I hate black women or that I hate, women, or I hate, black same-sex loving people. Like, it's just, but this is the culture of the academy. And that's what I'm saying, that I don't think that there's any point really outside of getting tenure and getting a good job to genuinely have to engage in those kinds of dialogues, right? The question is, can you find an audience, right? And if you have an audience, regardless of how small they are you doing good work for that audience? And I think that in founding Black Male Studies, I found an audience because there's lots of black men and women, to be quite honest, that support a new way of looking at black men in the world. And whether or not people in philosophy or the academy largely support that doesn't really matter, right? I mean, clearly all the awards that I've gotten, and certainly my placement over the last year, has shown that there is an audience and people who value the work and the kind of work that I do. And I think that black philosophers who are serious about doing research just have to find that. I think we become far too satisfied with begging white liberals for crumbs. You mentioned Charles Mills earlier. To be quite honest with you, Charles Mills was inducted, and Tommy Shelby too. We're both inducted to the Academy of Arts and Sciences, but we don't see any jobs listed in any of the areas that they've created. There's not a job for racial contractarianism. There's not a job for racial liberalism. There's not a job for any of these things. But we have critical philosophies of race, which doesn't even have a literature in it. Right? There are only 2 or 3 articles published, even defining what critical philosophy of race is and how it differs from critical race theory. 3 articles at a journal. And based on that, you see people listing it on their Vitas like, oh, my area of specialization is critical philosophies of race. This is about the asymmetrical relationship and authority given to white philosophers versus black philosophers, right? Somehow, and Bernasconi's certainly been cool. We haven't had any personal beef, but when you look institutionally at how the discipline of philosophy empowers a white scholar to create a field, to produce areas of specialization, to produce people with specialties in that area, compared to all the other black philosophers who are at better institutions, who produce more award-winning work, they don't get the same kind of respect by the discipline. And I think that's a problem. And I say and write that this is a real problem. And people get upset about it because I'm asking why senior black men and women, right? I mean, there are black women who are doing really interesting work in bioethics, social political thought too. Why these people aren't defining fields, but white people who come in and work in black areas get to define fields, produce people. This is clearly racist. I mean, you don't even have to. You just need to look at the differences between the number of black people that have been in endowed positions at Columbia, Northwestern, etc., compared to Bernasconi, who works in these areas more so in intellectual history, and ask, well, then why is it that this kind of narrative develops a specialization, but all these other black people have it, right? Yeah. And to me, that speaks to a real discriminatory intent and a power dynamic in how philosophies run. There's no reason that we shouldn't have an area of specialization in racial contractarianism, people who are specifically interested in working out how the racial contract operates. There's no reason we shouldn't have even people like George Yancey. I mean, Yancey's written tons of stuff, right? But you don't see Yancey's name mentioned as a key figure outside of like a side comment. Black people, black scholars are never centered, right, as a constellation of thought. And the minute that we do that, like when I come up with like black male studies, you get so many people saying, well, he doesn't have a right to do that. I'm like, what? I don't have a right to create a field? I was like, white people create fields all the time. But a black person, but think about how offended people are.
Man, you're like, uppity Negro, man. You're an uppity Negro, bro.
Well, they called me that too. They've called me that too. Right. I had a check this out. I had a white boy from he was my teacher at SIU. I won a Royce Award and sent the email to him that I won the award because he was editing the book. And this guy, start calling me names. Oh, you're arrogant. You're this and that. And this is how mediocre white people deal with black people surpassing them and even their expectations. Right? White people want to have a certain claim or authority over black intellectual production. Right? Yes, they do. Yeah, they do. They do. I mean, that's how it works even in the field of philosophy. So black people are never defined on their own worth. Black men and women are not defined on their own worth. Black men and women are defined by who they study with, the white figures that they articulate or replicate. They're never defined like, oh, well, this person did X, right? And that's why I'm just so immensely impressed with people like Charles, people like Leonard Harris, who created insurrectionist ethics, Lou Outlaw. Like, Lou Outlaw, is really one of the forefathers of the disciplines, right?
Right.
Blanche Curry, I love Blanche, right? Because these are people who sacrifice their livelihood and their energies to create a field that the discipline had to respect. And I think that they had to make certain negotiations. Bill Lawson, right? They had to make certain kinds of negotiations with white power structures and white institutions to get the foot in the door. But there's no reason that 30 years later you should expect us to still be at that same point. And I think for a lot of the white people in the field, that's why they're so offended by me, because I'm not going to sit back and pretend that we're equals. And that's why they call me arrogant. We're not equals by no stretch of the imagination. Certainly not equals in the stuff that I research, because I'm one of the few people in the world that research what I do, right? So if you come in and try to have a conversation with me about Black philosophy, we can talk. We can be collegial. But if you try to suggest to me that you have more expertise without half the number of publications I have, then I'm not going to agree with you. We're going to have a real problem, because there is a difference in what's being produced. There's a difference in the seniority and the level of the achievement. And white people do that to Black people all the time, right?
Oh,
You don't
yeah.
see conferences putting assistant professors and grad students on panels with senior endowed professors that who are white. But
yeah, one gets more money and more acclaim and more respect, and they get keynotes as opposed to panels. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. But when you see how they treat Black people, right? When you see senior Black scholars, and I'm not talking about me here because I'm only 40 years old, but I'm talking about people like the Bob Gooding Williams, the Shelby, etc. When you see how these institutions treat these people, right? The Nita Allen's of the world, etc. And they just, it's like, oh, it's a free for all. It's all, you all just Black people, right? You're all just Black people.
Yeah, that's how I feel about philosophy. That's how I feel about Black people in the academy in general. It's just like, okay, we got a couple of spooks. We're gonna like let them in and let them do work and let them play around, but we're not gonna really take what they do seriously. We're not gonna read the shit that they do. Every now and then we'll go hear what they have to say. It'll be a stimulating conversation, and they'll ask you a few questions. Most of the questions will be some bullshit questions because they haven't read the work or they haven't really probed into it. But I find, and you've been saying this a long time, and I've been thinking it too on my own. Like I love philosophy, but I think the philosophy in and of itself has limitations because
the discipline of philosophy does, yes.
Because if you just get caught in these theoretical pursuits, and you're writing about a group of people, a demographic who have some of the worst outcomes in the trajectory of their lives. And then you just get to sit around and play fucking games in theory. And you get to make proclamations about how people actually are just based on your speculation. And you don't have to temper what it is that you're writing with any data whatsoever. You just get to say anything. I mean, and then people start these echo chambers, and then they get into these silos, and then they get to become experts. And they don't even have any empirical data, evidence, nothing that, to temper what it is that they're speculating about. And then it has a real world impact on people's lives that you wouldn't even believe, because some of these things that these people write about become enshrined into public policy. They become public convention, or conventional wisdom in the public, and they have this terrible impact on people's lives. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it reifies what white people. I think it reifies what white people already think. So a lot of Black philosophy results in replicating how white people think about the world if they had the experience of Black people. And I think that's just insufficient. I think that one of the dangers it has for Black philosophers, especially, is when I mentioned that it's like us fighting for crumbs, right? It means that the Black person that becomes the least threatening and the most who imitates white people the most, who's closer to their thought and their trajectory, gets the job. And that's I think that's what's so dangerous about these disciplinary practices, right? Because you're telling Black people you're not allowed to be a specialist in something that we're not in. So we'll hire you to talk about race as long as you don't offend us. And I've been on search committees throughout the university in the United States where that was exactly the conversation. the most intelligent black person, especially now if it was a black man, the most intelligent person never got the job. Like the person that just had all the publications, that was most confident, that clearly demonstrated expertise, these people never got the job. It was always the person that, as one of my colleagues said once, I just feel like I could talk to him and wouldn't feel uncomfortable. That's who gets the job.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So in that world, you already know that black men have a performative deficit, but in general, black people are not being appreciated for their actual expertise. Like even if you and I don't agree, but you're collegial, I'll still vote for you to get a job if your expertise meets the demands of the position. Right. I'm not ideologically committed to anything. I mean, even feminists, I've argued for feminists to get positions in the academy, right? Like that, I disagree with feminism, right? But if you're not hostile or don't have, negative deleterious comments or stereotypes about black men, then there's no reason for me to hire you based on or not hire you based on a personal preference. But what happens with white people is they say, well, we're going to pick this black person, right?
Yeah.
You're going to pick this black person because this black person is most like the white people that we wish we had. So nobody with the actual expertise could get through. And that's the culture of philosophy. So we end up, what we do is we end up policing each other, right? So whereas other fields could go off and have real arguments, debates, and data, black people usually are forced to agree. And when we disagree about how we should read laws. But when it comes to empirical arguments like the stuff of diminishing returns, depression, the rape of black men, domestic abuse, these things never get any airtime because it makes people really uncomfortable. And nobody wants to put a black man who studies rape, sexual, child abuse, et cetera, on panels with women because the women get intimidated and feel bad about it. So if you argue that patriarchy doesn't cause domestic abuse, which is like, I don't know, a 30-year-old finding at this point, people are going to start saying, well, that just doesn't make me feel comfortable. So as a black man, I become criminalized because I have a different opinion, not because the research isn't better. Now that we don't have tons of data on it, so it's not a real academic culture. It's an ideological culture that masks itself as having rhetorical and intellectual currency that really doesn't outside of its own walls of consensus.
Yeah. So that's a problem. So look, what my initial position on all of this was. I'm like, Tommy, man, people are worried about your tone. And you're like, look, I don't care about the tone. Nobody's policing other people when it comes to tone. But when it comes to a black man, all of a sudden you got to watch your tone. And they even have theories in, like, I hate to say it, in feminist philosophy, which ultimately say that it's immoral to check people's tone. But then at the same time, if you have a tone, right, that doesn't fall within the purview of what their thought, the ideological scope of their thought, then all of a sudden you need to watch your tone. Your tone is fucked up. You got to scale it back a bit. You got to dial it back. Let me just say this, dude. I've always known you to keep the same even keel tone across time. I've never seen you change your comportment or your behavior or the approach you take to having debates with people when it comes to philosophy. I've never seen it. I mean, you talk fast as hell when you're on, like, when somebody asks you to speak, but I mean, you don't change your tone. It's like, okay, dude, this is my job. This is what I know. This is what I'm presenting. I'm not going to be fazed by your intimidation. I know you're trying to check me so that I don't say what it is that I'm saying. You're trying to censor me. And you're like, hell no, I'm not going to let you censor me. And my whole thing was, well, Tommy, we need to try to find a way to bridge the gap. We need to learn how to have these conversations. You like, look, bro, let me tell you something, man. You're just going to have what you're going to have. People are not going to change their tones. People are not going to change their ideologies. They're here not to learn. They're not really actually trying to explore new areas of thought or new ways of thinking of things. They're just stuck in their rigid, canalized system of thought. So,
and you have to leave them to their own devices, brother. Like, and again, I think what you're saying is so powerful because, as you know, the way I'm speaking now is the way I speak at philosophy conferences, no matter what people say to me, right? And people think that this is aggressive, right? Because it's like if someone's like, I'll speak this way because you can't shake me. I know what I know. Most of the time I have it memorized. So I know things. And that makes them infuriated. But the counterpart is, as you and I both know, is that there are people in philosophy departments that actively yell at people, that actively, have fights with people at conferences. None of which that I've ever done, because I think that's unprofessional and tacky. But nonetheless, that's what people do. And those people are never called aggressive. White people who do that, be they male or female, are never called aggressive. But a black man who speaks in this tone, at this pace, right, is somehow aggressive and picking a fight. These are racist stereotypes. And other black people consent to this because it could benefit them on the job market. I mean,
Yeah.
if the role was fair, would you really want to compete with Tommy Curry for a job? I mean, would most people who've been out for 9 or 10 years really want to put my record against their record? Of course not. But if you could construct the black men who produce as much as me, or who are as well awarded and acknowledged internationally as I am, as a threat to white people, or threat to women, etc., then it's an easy path to a tenure track job. And that's how the political game is played. Black men who are usually outspoken, who don't have liberal politics, who aren't sympathetic to this kind of leftism and this racist account of white feminist theory that allows gender to overtake racism and white supremacy, they're presented as a problem for analytic and continental departments. So if you scare or make white people uncomfortable, you generally won't get jobs in the discipline. Should you change to do that? That was not my policy, right? And I was the youngest person in our field to ever get a full professorship at a Research One institution. So you have to live with consequences. But at some point, when you're better than when you're better than them, you're just better than them. You're better than the white people who keep trying to demean you. And I think that it says something about the resiliency of black people in general, and specifically black men, to say that we don't have to operate by your standards. That's not an unprofessional thing to say. It's just saying that I have a job. There's rules to promotion. I'm going to follow those rules to promotion. And if you don't like that I've come in as an assistant professor while you're still an associate professor, now I'm a full professor, that's a personal problem of why you haven't produced. That's not black people's problem that they outperform you. And that's what I think a lot of black people have to understand. The mediocrity of the white counterpart in philosophy that doesn't do the research, that doesn't publish, is not our problem. Us being better than the majority of white people who are doing the same job is not our problem.
But you know what, Tommy, man, I'm gonna just keep it 100 with you.
Yeah.
Like, I don't give a fuck who's offended or not. You know what I'm saying? Like, a lot of these guys, man, these white dudes, and they get these degrees, man, and they just sit back and they don't do shit for years, man.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, and philosophy is the type of degree where you don't have to have any empirical data, or you don't have to really demonstrate, that you're doing some meticulous kind of research. You can just write some bullshit down and act as if you're actually doing your job. You know what I'm saying? Because of course, the proof is in what it is that you actually do in terms of publication. It all depends on what institution you're at also, though. You might be at a primarily teaching-oriented institution where all of those publication demands aren't actually put upon you. But, I mean, dude, like, I had to throw it up to you, dog. You fucking shining. You know what I'm saying? So, like, if they want to hit you up, then, like, okay, look, this is what I've done. Here's X, Y, Z. Here's A, B, and C, and 1, 2, 3. I've done all this. What are you doing? You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, that's just how it's got. I mean, if that's the game, right?
Right.
So
not
why?
you,
but I mean, hey, man,
white people get sensitive, right? And again, this is what I mean. There are not a lot of black men from working class backgrounds, not a lot of black men from the South, and certainly not a lot of black men that are like in our generation, right? So you got to think, I'm 40 years old. So the black men that the white philosophers are used to seeing are going to be in their mid 50s, if not older. Right. So that's a whole generation gap. So if you're talking about somebody who's working class, who didn't get brought up in the sensibilities that in order to make it, you have to be like white people. Because I was raised in the South where the understanding was white people hate you. So when I came into the academy and white people didn't like me, I was like, oh, this Tuesday. You know what I'm saying?
Because you was with you been in those environments before already, and you were in the debating team, and you're used to being a controversial figure, and you just took it on like, look, I'm doing my work. I know you're not going to like some of what it is that I'm doing. I know you're not going to like some of what it is that I'm saying, but you have to be able to argue against what it is that I'm saying. Then after the shit is over with, I'm tabling this shit. Let's go have some sushi. We can talk about philosophy.
That's always been my view. I mean, and I'll be honest with you, it was my view because, like, coming through debate in the 90s, people would have all kind of arguments, man. And like you don't get offended by it because you understand that claims and warrants mean that you could have different views that are just as rigorous on the same issue. So
Right.
you can build a whole case on something with if it has empirical evidence, and someone could disagree, and both are tenable views. I have absolutely no problem with it. But that's what I mean when I say that the other side is the intolerance. Their epistemology is not an actual criteria; it's an ideology, right?
Yeah.
So they fill their world with people who agree with me, and anyone who disagrees with me can't be part of my world. And unfortunately, because again, this is part of the underspecialization of Black philosophy in the discipline, if you take a view of the world that's liberal and not really based on what Black people have been saying for 200 years, that's extremely palatable to white people. And I'm not exactly palatable to white people because I'm constantly reminding them one of what you don't know, right? And let's be very clear. Let's just lay it out what the issue that white people have with the kinds of Black people that come into the field, which I think I'm one of. You're not comfortable with people telling you that you're wrong. You're certainly not comfortable with Black people not only telling you that you're wrong, but you don't know enough to claim you know something. And three, you don't like people who are younger and more successful than you. So when you look at what Black people have and can achieve, right, that in itself offends white people because they want Black people that depend on them. They want Black people who are going to say, well, I want to build a relationship with you because you're my only salvation to recognition and professionalism.
Oh man, don't do that, bro. Not the Django shit, man. But
let's keep it real, man. Like I'm a first generation Southern Black man. When I came into philosophy, I was very clear that philosophy's racist, there's structural racism. Even when Obama was president, I was the person. You remember when I was on Facebook and doing all those podcasts on Sirius XM, I was constantly saying this would be the issue, right? I was constantly saying that there's going to be a backlash to Obama. I was making these arguments about white feminism. Nobody listened. I actually lost a job up in Milwaukee because the people said they were uncomfortable with my arguments about the racism of feminism and white women. And look at what happened 2 years later, right? Like there is no upshot for being right in philosophy. So Black people have to think differently about how they engage white people. Now, if you want to spend your career trying to be liked by white people and trying to prove that you're safe, especially, Black men, by God bless you. I'm not mad about the hustle. It'll be a much easier career. But if you have a fundamental belief that you're not only good at what you're doing, but you're exceptional in it, and you have the evidence, like the publication rate, the awards, the books, etc., that show you're different, then I think you should really consider whether or not asking white people or begging white people for recognition is the most efficient way to build a career.
But you know what, dude? Right? I'm just gonna say this, man. I've known you for a number of years, man. I think you're one of the coolest dudes I know, man, in terms of like in academia. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's like, okay, dog. He knows what he knows. He's not gonna sit there and play games with you about what he knows. It's bottom line. Like, what's the use of doing that? And if you have a disagreement with him, he'll just disagree with you. But then let's have some sushi and chill. Like, what?
Yeah,
like,
we don't have to agree to be friends or colleagues. Yeah.
Like, what's the big deal? But again, if you're attached to an ideology and your academic work becomes so connected to your political work and what it is,
right.
Your entire worldview it's like a comprehensive worldview, right? Yeah. And there's no capacity to even be flexible in terms of entertaining new ideas from different areas. That to me is not what academia should be about. It should be. No, it's like every ideal should be subject to scrutiny. Every theory should be subjected to scrutiny. There's no pass because you're Black or you're a woman or that you're gay or that you're a trans person or any other thing. Or you got to be able to hold your weight in the debate. And if you lose, you lose. If you win, you win. That's just it.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, look, that's how. Again, that's my mentality, right? And nowadays, people even say that mentality, like the fact that I have evidence and I use empirical data, is Eurocentric, and I'm like, that's fine. I mean, as I say, I genuinely wish even the Black people who disagree with me, I wish them great careers. Unlike other, this is the funny thing. You know me for a while. I don't have to like try to hate on anybody. True. I'm actually like, you don't see me being like, oh, we got to stop X, Y, and Z from getting the job and stuff. I don't start rumors about people, even people I disagree with, because I'm not that upset about my career, right? I don't feel like I get it. When I was in Texas, I was upset that I would get passed over for jobs where I was the most qualified by far. But you can't do anything about fit. But I don't have to go out and like do this. Let's go talk about people to try to sabotage them or X, Y, because that's silly to me. That's us. White people love black people who will fight and talk negative about other black people. And I learned that when I was in elementary school back in Lake Charles, Louisiana, that the black people that said the most negative things about their own people were always the people that white people liked the most. So the one thing that I commit myself never to doing, even if I do not like the person, because there's a good 5 to 10 people, maybe 15 people, black people in philosophy, I just can't stand. But you will never hear me make any public indictment about those black people because I know how white people will use that information. They pit us against each other so that they can hide their racism behind what other black people say about black people. And if you attack each other, and this is why I'm always upset with the way they conduct business. If you attack each other, you're already doing the work the white people want to do to discredit us. And there's quite a few black people, right, men and women, who make their career by assassinating the character of other people. When they go give papers and talk about how people's work sucked, that was no good. Why is that a comment? Nobody asks you your opinion. If you're not editing the work, then what difference does it make? If somebody asks me a question about somebody I don't like, I was like, well, I disagree with this person on X, but they're doing interesting work in this field, right? And that's it. Because whatever you wanted to get from that, you don't have to get from me. But
right.
Some people are raised different, I suppose.
But I will say this though, there's a difference between publicly, attacking somebody, which is ad hominem, and subjecting their theories to critical, critical attack. I mean, not necessarily. I don't want to use the word attack, but it's one thing, to respect somebody as a human being, and then to go ham on their thought. Like you put it out there, you published it, so now you got to defend it in the public.
That's different.
Yeah. So that's a whole different thing. But see, a lot of times people don't take it that way because they like. I'm gonna tell you how this goes, Tommy. I'm gonna just keep it 100 with you, and it's the case. If there's a group of people who rally around some figure that's central to their own thought because they've adopted what those persons have, asserted, and they integrate and interpolate those thoughts into their own work, if you basically attack the thought of that person whom they're trying to emulate or who they esteem, then that becomes a personal attack on themselves. You know what I'm saying? So it's like if you attack, let's say, for example, the thought of bell hooks. Right. You know what I'm saying? Like if I knew you were gonna pick that. I knew you were gonna pick bell hooks. But that's the segue. So you're not attacking the person of bell hooks. You're just saying, look, here's what you're saying about black men, right? You're making a claim. You got to defend it. And it just seems like what it is that you're saying, it has a direct link to a history of thought that is profoundly racist. But hey, absolutely. So having said all that, before we go into your paper, which is really what I want you to talk about and discuss here today, I want to give a shout out. What's up, Dr. Johnson is in the house. He says, what's good? What's up, Jerome, I want to give you a shout out. Thank you very much, sir, for your donation. At Xavier Brothers Group, I want to also give you a shout out for your donation. I'm just giving, running down the line here, Doc. T Fitness for you. Thank you, sir. Corey Green, thank you so much for the donation. Omni Americana, Joe from DC. Kalanja Kala, I want to also give you a shout out for the donation. Jermaine, I want to thank you. And also I want to thank, I know it's another brother up here who, no, it's not. But also I want to thank people who hit me up on the Cash App. I want to thank my brother. Hold on, let me see. I'm trying to look for, sorry, Tommy, man. I just,
Oh, it's fine. It's fine, brother.
Politics as usual, man. And I really appreciate.
I appreciate the brother supporting.
I appreciate it. Like you can't imagine, man. So I just want to make sure that I get everybody in, and nobody's left. Marvin Battle, I want to thank you, my brother Michael Green, and also Anwar. I want to thank each of you all because y'all help the show. You keep me motivated. And look, Tommy, man, what's wild is a long time ago, man. I said this about you, right? I said, man, you're like the 50 Cent of philosophy. You remember me telling you that, man?
I remember.
You remember me telling you that?
But his first album, like the one they released, that first album was kind of hard. So I was like, I didn't know what sense you meant it back then. That was kind of gritty though.
No, but I mean, like, well, put it this way: for 50 Cent, nobody was off bounds. Anybody could get it. Anybody could get critique. Now, of course. 50 is coming with ad homs. Okay, that's what he does. Okay, but it's just all in sport because that's what hip hop is about. Right. My whole viewpoint was Tommy I would now change that up and say you're more like Eminem. You just don't give up. You just don't give up. You know what I'm saying? Like you don't care. And we need people like you, bro. We need you to keep doing the work you're doing because the
I
work
appreciate
you're doing is unabashed, unafraid. You know, it's courageous, man, what you're doing. And
I appreciate it.
And look, you already know how tentative I am. But people consider me to be some sort of monster now that I got a damn YouTube channel. But it is what it is, man. Because it doesn't matter.
But brother, if I could just say, I mean, you remember when we first met, and I told you, it's you're never going to outpace what people think about you unless you put on a performance or a show for them where they have no evidence to say anything otherwise. And that takes so much effort. Right. I mean, because what black men often end up debating in philosophy is how do I put on a persona where every time they see me, I'm in a 3-piece suit and I'm always got my line up and I'm always speaking as if I'm from the south of Britain. Right. Like you got these cats going to Ivy's acting like they got British accents. And now that I'm in Britain, I hear it all the time. Right. So, and you see me, and I'm not talking like I don't have to talk with pretense. We can have a conversation. And, here's the thing. If people are the discipline are uncomfortable with black men, that's their problem. Black men need to assert that they have a voice and a perspective, and that's what's going to be the position of their criticism. This whistling Vivaldi stuff for the past generation that black men have been doing to get into the academy, to make white people feel as if they should be there. That time is past.
Yeah, that's over with. Yeah,
that's over with. And I think that, and I tell people this all the time. I don't really think that the placement that I got at the University of Edinburgh is really that much about me. It's about the possibility that our race has to now do something that was never done before. There's never been a black person hired in the philosophy department at the birthplace of the Enlightenment. There's never, to my knowledge, been a black person from the United States hired at an ancient university as a professorial chair or a distinguished professor. So these things mean something, not because it means that Tommy's exceptional. It means that our race is capable of doing things that people have never thought to be done before. So if I can do it, that means that other black people could do it, right? I went to SIU, so surely black people that got into Yale, Harvard, et cetera, could do this as well, right? Certainly black people that are coming from MIT, Ohio State, et cetera. This changes what our race is capable of doing. And the people who are too ignorant or too jealous or hateful to see that are missing the larger picture of how history actually moves across time. Our debates with each other mean nothing because we'll all be dead another 50 or 60 years anyway. So what matters is whether or not we've moved the mark so that we can actually start doing things that white people have been doing for generations. Because when you're talking about the academy, when you're talking about moving throughout university systems, we're still fighting for access. And us trying to, ape, it's an old word. Us trying to mimic white people to get there is not the best way of doing it. Right?
Yeah, because it's just not genuine. It's not authentic. You're not going to learn much. You're not going to, provide much in terms, of something posterity can be proud of. You got to be you. One thing I want you to do, though, I ain't gonna lie. What I want you to do, man, is start doing 5-minute blurbs again, man. You know what I'm saying? Like, hey, dude, I can help you facilitate that, bro. Hey, man, you need this because people need that dose of your interpretation of contemporary events, man. You know what I'm saying? Right. Outside of I mean, I know you might not have time to do it, but anytime you got time to do it, I'm giving you the open invitation.
I appreciate it.
You know what I'm saying?
It's just time. It's just time. I mean, I'm doing so many things, but I'm always trying to, that's why I'm always humbled by the invitation I get from you, Hassan, other people, because I want to stay connected to the black people in America. You know what I'm saying? Like my heart's with black people really from the South because that's the people I come from, So it's never one of those things where, and my wife will tell you, man, like even when I got the position at Edinburgh, part of me was heartbroken because I had to leave home. I'm Southern, so I took the position at A&M. I hate Texas, but I was 3 hours away from where I grew up, so that means I was close to family. there's other considerations that I think, especially with the work I do about Black men, they keep me tied to the United States. So
True.
I'm always trying to make sure that I keep that in the back of my mind, and my research really does reflect that I'm still trying to engage and solve or think about the problems that Black people experience there.
Yeah, man. Well, we need you to keep your head on what's going on in the U.S., man. Don't
And
get
I'm
hey, man. Don't get to enjoying that European hamburger and that freshwater sushi that you got over there, man. To the point
no,
where you
that is
can't.
not going to happen.
But
It's
but
not going to happen.
but let's begin to make. And I want to also shout out brother Man Friday. Thank you for the donation, and also the Seventh Project. I want to give you a shout out also. But one of the things I think that's most important about the conversation that you're having with me now is that, like, you are yourself, you know where you're from, you feel confident in your capacities and your abilities, and you've done, like, dude, you did what David Hume couldn't do, dog.
Right.
You know what I'm
Right.
saying? Like, that's significant historically, man. Like, David Hume tried to get a job at the University of Edinburgh and couldn't get it. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So, and
I think
you,
he worked in the library here.
huh?
I think he ended up working in the library or something.
Dog, I mean, and many of these people don't know who David Hume is and his philosophical importance or significance. You know, I don't think it's worth even going into that at all. But the whole point is, you know, dog, all I can do is just say big ups to you, bro, for
Oh
having
man,
done that. It's a hell of an achievement, a hell of an
I
accomplishment.
appreciate that, man. And to be honest with you, it means a lot. It means a lot. And like I said, when I got the placement, I knew the people who were I heard the people hating on me, and then I heard a lot of people that were celebrating it, and that's just the way life goes. But at the bottom of it though, I think this moves the needle for Black people. I think that's what's important.
Yeah, regardless, is hate it or love it. You know what I'm saying? The
It's
underdogs
what
on
it is.
top. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So let's get down to the nitty gritty here, because I want you to kind of break down. And I got some questions for you also about this
Sure.
article that you just
Sure.
recently wrote. And the title of it is called, I don't know if you already have a placement for this or you're going to be searching for placement for it. I don't
No,
know.
it's already forthcoming.
Okay, so yeah, I assumed that it was. So the title of the article is called Decolonizing the Intersection: Black Male Studies as a Critique of Intersectionality's Indebtedness to Subculture of Violence Theory. Now, look, man, I'm telling you, this is the barbershop, bro. You know what I'm saying? So we want you to or you know, dice game, or the fishing trip with the older Black men. You know what I'm saying? I
Yeah,
want you to
yeah.
break down, what it is that you're trying to articulate in this article, and make it decipherable for my peoples. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
At the barbershop, because that's what I like to do. I like to break down difficult concepts so that anybody can understand it. So I'm like Buddy Love, you know what I'm saying? I'm like that guy. I'm the interpreter. You know what I'm saying? So
Right.
I
I
know
feel
my
you.
strengths. That's what we're gonna do. So because I'm critical of intersectionality on my channel, and
Mhm.
precisely because of the same reasons that you're critical of it, it's like there's no space for vulnerability of Black men. The only picture that's portrayed of us related to this theory is that we're monsters. That we're,
Yeah,
we're somehow
we're
we're
less than patriarch.
savages.
Yeah,
Yeah, or that we are privileged. The privileged savage is what we are.
right.
Like, and I just don't know how that shit adds up. So go ahead and break it
Yeah.
down for us, man. Tell us a little bit about what
Sure.
you were trying to accomplish when you wrote the article, and take us through some of the, the steps and the stages that you went through in developing the article.
Well, look, yeah. I mean, I think people try to stop Black people, Black scholars, especially Black men, from criticizing intersectionality, because it's become a sacred creed. And what I mean by that is that, look, if you criticize intersectionality, you won't get a job in the academy. And what I was trying to show in this article is two things. One, there's not as much separation between Black feminism and white feminism as one may think, right? Um, the idea is that Kimberly Crenshaw has made tremendous efforts and contributions in how we understand certain aspects of Black female experience. Unfortunately, her theory is severely limited when you try to apply it to Black men. And I think that one of the things that happens in the discipline is again, as you were saying earlier, because you can't criticize, Hooks or Crenshaw, etc., is that you don't get to see the problems or holes in their theory. It's like you have to entertain it as if it's perfect. And Crenshaw has made lots of statements and written several pieces where she said, "Look, I'm really indebted to a white feminist named Catherine McKinnon." And McKinnon is known as for her radical feminism, specifically her dominance theory, which basically argues that all women are oppressed by all men. The
Yeah.
reason that women are oppressed by all men is because of things like domestic violence and rape, right? So, Crenshaw is saying, look, women as a class, women as an ontology mean they're a fixed group of being. This makes one naturally vulnerable to things like sexual assault and rape. And that's part of the way that patriarchy operates. Well, Crenshaw utilizes some of that thinking and theory when she starts accounting for violence like sexual assault and domestic abuse in the Black community. So she wants to say that, look, because Black women are still women, we can create this idea of sameness, right? So Black women are generally different, but they also share some of the same characteristics that white women share in terms of their vulnerability to rape and sexual assault. And that sameness allows us to use the theories that white feminists have developed that say that, look, patriarchy, specifically the act of rape, is a way to dominate and establish, to subjugate women within the Black race. The problem with that is that there is no evidence for that claim beyond some really racist theories that are being used by people like, Karen Holmes and Joyce Williams, and even Susan Brown Miller. The idea was that, look, after Miniature Mamira wrote a book on forcible rape in 1971, the myth of the Black rapist changed. We now knew that most rape is intraracial, meaning that it happens between people of your same race rather than interracial, which means that it happens between different races. So where the myth of the Black rapist was that Black men always wanted to rape white women, Miniature Mamira's book said, no, that's not true, because Black men mostly rape Black women and white men mostly rape white women. Well, what's the problem with that? Well, there is no problem. You would think that would be a progressive moment. But Miniature Mamira was a student of Wolfgang and Farrakouti, who wrote a book on subculture and violence in 1967. So Miniature Mamira believed that you could explain the higher rates of rape amongst Black people based on the idea that their culture was more naturally aggressive and Black men had a weaker masculinity than white men. Because Black men were weaker men than white men, they developed a compensatory masculinity, or masculinity that obsessed with sex and sexual conquest as a way to prove their manhood. Now, this was something that historically had been used even to explain the deviance of poor white boys back in the 1950s with Albert Cohen's work. But feminists started using it once they saw the Miniature Mamira's work, because they were able to say that Black men really are culturally programmed to be rapists, right?
Okay.
And this is the kind of work that's being cited by Crenshaw when she's saying, oh, feminists have already shown that rape within the Black community is a form of domination. Well, that's not true, because there was only one book that made that argument, and that was the Williams and Holmes book. So when you start reading Williams and Holmes, what do you find? You find the most insidiously racist and incomprehensible data that I've seen published. They make arguments about so subculture violence theory said all Black people have a culture of violence and aggression, right? So that means Black men and women, okay? And Black women, because Black men were weak, actually that's why Black women had higher rates of intimate partner homicide. So the view was like, look, Black men don't run the house, Black women do. So Black women use homicide and threats of murder to kill Black men to keep them in order. So that's why in the Black race, Black women kill Black men more than in the white race, where white men kill white women, right? So that's the view. Right. But Jamir said, well, okay, but that not only expands to homicide, we could also use it to explain rape. And he said the reason that women are involved in rape is because Black mothers and Black girlfriends don't find rape to be exceptional. They find it a normal part of Black males or Black people's violent culture. Well, in 1975, this white boy named Lynn A. Curtis was like, nah. Subculture violence theory doesn't work, because when you're talking about violence in the Black community, you're actually just talking about Black men. So he developed a theory which he called contra-cultural theory, which said that in a Black community, all the deviance, homicide, and rape come from poor Black men, because they have a culture that's so vile and uncivil that they have to be understood as their own separate species of being, right? And this is what white feminists start picking up. So they start reading black men as being culturally obsessed with their phallus and developing a phallic identity that was utilizing violence and murder and rape to establish who they were in American society. So this idea that you get from the super predator in the 1990s, that started with this kind of thinking by Lynn A. Curtis in 1975. Because the idea was, even in poor black communities, there is a distortion of values that are so severe that they are even seen as being outside the communities that they're in. And that was poor black men. That was the super predator, the criminogenic, product of black subcultures of violence. And this is what white feminism was doing from 1970 to the mid 1980s. And in 1989, Crenshaw actually cites these people as evidence that black men basically use rape to keep women in check. And the idea is not based on the act of rape, because when you look at the numbers of convicted rapes for black people, I think black men are a third. It's like 5,000, like 12 or 14,000 of convictions. So black men are not the majority, but nonetheless, the threat of rape and these kind of sexual dynamics are used to say that black men are patriarchs. This idea that patriarchy operates in the black community the same way that it does in the white community was created by the argument made in the second assault. And what my paper basically does is ask the question, how is it that the arguments about what black men and black masculinity actually are ends up coming from white racist criminologists like Wolfgang Farracuti, Menachem Amir, and racist white feminists like Susan Brown Miller, Williams, and Holmes? And if that's the basis of the assumptions generated by intersectional thought and theory, then perhaps, just perhaps, we need to start rethinking some of the assumptions we make about intersectional thought and theory. And even more concerning is that even so, if someone says, well, that's just Crenshaw, it doesn't talk about, how intersectionality deals with black men generally. Well, the most cited article on black masculinity and intersectionality is actually an article ranked by Frank Rudy Cooper. And in that article, he talks about how black men try to emulate white men. And he says that basically the emulation, the imitation of black men trying to be white heterosexual men is the basis of how black men oppress other groups in the black community. And the only person he cites on that is Bell Hooks. The problem with that is that Bell Hooks is getting her arguments about black masculinity from the same race as white people. Like, you could put Wolfgang and Farracuti's book, The Subculture of Violence, next to Bell Hooks, and it's almost verbatim the same thing. Like, right. Bell Hooks, it looks like Bell Hooks literally just read Menachem Amir and Wolfgang and Farracuti and put them together, and every time they said subculture, she replaced it with patriarchy or sexism, right? And I've done this page by page. I think I've put it on Twitter. You can just read them line by line. It's the exact same thought and thinking. But nobody could criticize them. So these really insidious criminological theories that now define black masculinity have never been questioned. So I argue that black male studies is really needed to demystify these racist theories that feminist thought has been using to talk about masculinity generally. And that without us demystifying this and really exposing the reliance that a lot of gender theory, specifically black feminist theories about black masculinity have with previous criminological theories, then we're not actually getting anywhere. And this is why black men end up looking like violent murderers, rapists, and abusers, is because that's already built into the assumptions of the theory. But that's what white racists were arguing justifies black men being pulled out of society, either killed or put in the carceral system.
Yeah, so let me interpret this, right, and tell me if I'm right or wrong. Okay, so ultimately, you got the social scientific literature in the mid 70s, just for the most part, is racist. Okay, I mean, they're relying on assumptions about black people and the kind of culture that they have or the kind of behavior that they're exhibiting as pathological. This again, it's racist. Okay, yeah. And what ends up happening is intersectionality comes along and extracts black women away from that kind of pathology, and it relegates it specifically to men, to black men. So you got this culture, you got this subculture of violence theory, but women don't have to be attached to it anymore. In fact, We're finding a way to partition off black women away from it and to assign it specifically to black men.
Yes.
And that's what intersectionality really actually is achieving. It's not explicitly saying this, of course, but in effect, that's what's happening. That's what's occurring. So
yeah, but in fairness, it was done by Lene Curtis first, and Lene Curtis was the person that most influenced the debates with these white feminists, like in the Second Assaults, Karen and Williams and Holmes. The intersectionality read Williams and Holmes, who actively cite contra culture theory, and that's how it made it there.
Okay.
So their intersectionality's concept of gender is really just borrowing from Catherine McKinnon, Susan Brown Miller, and Williams and Holmes. That's where they're getting their arguments about womanhood from, and then or at least Crenshaw is. And then from there, you're getting the transposition, so to speak, of a subculture of violence / contra culture of violence theory that excludes black women from the system and deposits all the blame of violence on black men. And look, part of the reason I started researching this is like I was genuinely interested. I was like, how is it? Because I look at all the data. Like, it's not like poor black women in the same communities as black men are generally less violent unless you're talking about homicide. So I started asking, well, how is it possible that black people, that somehow these black theorists deposit all the negativity in the black community on black men? So I started looking for theories, and I just kept reading and reading and reading, and I was like, I found it. I found where they get this stuff from.
Boy, you like a producer looking for that good record. I'm sorry, man. I'm just like you digging in the record crates, looking for the perfect sample to put on a beat, man.
Yeah, that's how I research. And then I go back and I read the Second Assault, and she has, they draw a chart. Like they're the first people to introduce the idea that there's patriarchy in the black community, because I could not find any sources before black feminism that address black men as patriarchs. And this is like the only book. Right? This is like the only book. Her and Firestone, Shulamith Firestone, are the only. It's these white feminists trying to talk about how black men doing militant civil rights actions are trying to invent patriarchy. So before the 1970s, there is no record of black men ever being referred to as patriarchs. And then the only group that's defining them that way are white feminists, and then only in the 80s, black feminists, right?
Right.
So even when you have the National Black Feminist Organization starting in the 1973, you get Kambahi, you still don't have this rich articulation of black men as being sexist or racist or patriarchal. I'm sorry. And then you get Michelle Wallace, who gestures towards their sexism and their misogyny. And then in the 80s with Bell Hooks, you get this explosion of this argument that they're patriarchal. But none of those arguments started with black women. Those arguments started with white feminists. One on the cultural front with the Dialectics of Sex by Firestone, on the other front in 1975 or so with the Second Assault concerning rape. So none of the arguments that talk about black men as patriarchs are separated from the racist criminological theories that are either trying to dismiss black militancy or trying to paint black men as rapists, primarily of black women in the community. Because the Second Assault goes so far as to say that they literally, like, this is how racist it is. There are actual paragraphs in there that say that when black men rape black women, they're doing nothing more. They're doing no more than imitating white men. So black men are allegedly don't even have agency, right?
Yeah.
So the interracial rapist is completely an extension of the patriarchal connection of white male masculinity. But because black men are subcultural, right? And remember, this is the dominant assertion in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. Because black people were subcultural, that meant that the masculinity they had could not be real masculinity. It always had to be imitated because they have different values than white people do. This is the same argument that we found in the late 19th century with ethnology. The idea was that on an evolutionary scale, black men were more feminine than white women, who were more masculine, because white women, being part of the white race, had a masculine characteristic. And feminine races were savage. So even the femininity of a white woman was more masculine than the masculinity of a black man, right? Because of the racial component. This is just an inversion of that same kind of theory, because the argument was black men were apatriarchal or feminine males. Joseph Pleck in 1975 actually has a book called The Myth of Masculinity, where he's talking about black men's masculinity as F-M, which is feminine masculinity. So well into the 1980s, right? And I've read all these studies. Black men's notion of masculinity was never patriarchal. It was always feminine or effeminate because it wasn't real. So basically, all these people did is said that, look, because black men don't have fathers, because they're hypermasculine, this is a feminine kind of masculinity that's associated with deviance, savagery, and of course, rape. And even the feminists are making that argument because they say the only way that black men could enforce patriarchy is not through actual power, it's just through violence. And surprise,
Yeah.
surprise, that's the language that we have today.
So let me just put this in simple terms. Rape and violence by black men is compensatory for their failure to be able to match up to the masculinity of white people.
For them not being
White men. They really can't actually be patriarchs. So the only way that they can establish some kind of pseudo patriarchy is through raping and just being, savage in relation to violence. That's the only way that they can attain it.
That's the argument. That's the argument they make.
So it's misdirected violence because they can't actually attain the kind of violence, I guess, that white men are able to perpetrate.
Well, actually, the funny thing is that the feminists argue that white masculinity is patriarchal and creates wars, but black masculinity is the most violent. So
That's
white masculinity,
I mean, look, dude, you got ships, bombs, nuclear weapons.
I know.
I mean, this is why, okay, you remember this video put out by the comedian Ari Spears, and he was talking about like the greatest Jedi mind trick in the world is to get people to believe that black men are more violent than white men when black men have never created world wars. They've never created like gas chambers and like en masse just start exterminating people. You know what I'm saying? Like there's no evidence that black men have done these things. But the funny part about criminology to me as a science or a discipline is the starting point of it and all of the stuff that's left out of it. So when you talk about rape and when you talk about violence and murder, I mean, what about all of the murder of the indigenous people? Like, when do you want to start with this analysis of crime?
I'm well with you. But the thing, this is the point. This is selective, it's racially biased. It clearly, and the thing is, they're making arguments about rape based on a survey of like 300 people. They basically did a study. These two women are still teaching. Holmes and Williams, they're still teaching in San Antonio, Texas. So they did a small study. The study doesn't make sense because it'll say something like black men were the group in their study that believed women were excited by the idea of rape, but simultaneously black men had the most liberatory values and supported women's liberation and feminism, right? Or it has things saying like white men had the most feminist definitions of rape, and the most feminist and the least amount of victim blaming, right? Like none of their data actually supports their theories of patriarchy because it keeps going every which way. It's just random findings of like 300 people or so. But nonetheless, this is the theory that they propose. I only found 3 book reviews of the book, The Second Assault, and 2 of the 3 were bad, and the other one was written by like a grad student that just summarized the book. They said, "Oh, it could be an addition to something." So, this is not a book that received a lot of acclaim. This is not even a book that was praised like Susan Brown Miller work, but this is nonetheless a book that established that black men are patriarchs through the use of violence and rape. The problem with that is it's bad science. And because no one's allowed to investigate what they say or what feminist theories about black men are, nobody's ever written about this. Like I Google searched it. I did Google Scholar. I did, nobody wrote anything about this book attacking any of its findings before. So think about that. That means that the ideas that we have of patriarchy come from the 1970s. And yet nobody has been allowed to look back at the 1970s and start questioning whether or not these theories were actually true, because we're supposed to accept it as ideological fact, right? It's fact despite ideology. So I go back and I just read the book, read the reviews. It's like, this doesn't make any sense. Not only does it not make sense, this is based on well discredited research, even within its own time. And on top of that, it completely ignores the rates of violence and sexual abuse that's being cited in the very same studies of subculture. Because subculture violence theory comes from ghetto studies, which is basically where all these white people like Tally LeBeau, like Tally's corner, right? LeBeau goes in and starts talking to black men on the street corner, right? And they start, we can talk about your culture. And they find out that the black boys are having sex when they're like 7 or 8. And they find out that the women are beating the men and that it's just cultures of violence. It's just ghetto culture study. It's the same thing. So what's funny to me, and this is what I think is the upshot of the article, out of all these theoretical innovations, black studies, black feminism, intersectionality, black men are still viewed the same way in all these theories, since they're viewed the same as when John Dollar was writing about them in the Caste and Class in the Southern Town in 1937. Nothing's changed. And what I'm saying is, not only do you have the propagation and proliferation of racist and misandric theories about black men, but you also have the continuity. So whereas black women are able to use intersectionality to create new and unique aspects of their identity that separate them from the same histories of white women, you have intersectionality constraining and confining black men within these imagined histories and accounts of masculinity that have absolutely no evidence for them. The only reason that they're being upheld is because that's what we started with. These are incredibly racist and classist accounts of masculinity, because these things were formulated on poor white boys. The idea was like, well, why are poor white boys more deviant than middle class white boys? And that created a literature about compensatory masculinity, because white people said middle class white boys with fathers and mothers were better, had more healthy masculinity than poor white boys who did. So then you translate that to poor black boys, and that's why all the literature is talking about how poor black men grow up to be deficient, apatriarchal, and effeminate. And the funny thing about that is that the evidence says that the higher the class status of the black family, and if the father's present, the more masculine they are. So there's a whole history of this stuff that's completely contradictory, that's completely based on class, that's never mentioned in the works of people like Bell Hooks. Because Bell Hooks wants to say that all black masculinity operates in this way, right? And
Right.
the reality is, all the literature says poor black masculinity operates in this way because it's a class theory, right? Because you have to be outside, you have to be in the subgroup of a lower socioeconomic status to actually form subcultural values.
Yeah, well, of course, like you said, Catherine McKinnon comes along and changes all of that, because then it becomes more ontological as opposed to
Yeah.
value cultural. But I want to look. What's funny about this to me is that when you talk about black men, and it's interesting because this idea of compensatory violence being emblematic of men who can't quite reach up to white patriarchy. One of the things I notice amongst black men, especially in the black manosphere, is that they see things the exact opposite way. I mean, many of these guys think that sexual conquest and spending too much time obsessing over sex or women or gaining the affections or notoriety of women is the very thing that's going to prevent them from attaining wealth, following their goals and achieving them, and
Mhm.
developing discipline and skill. So it's odd to me that they would be making these kind of assessments about who black men
Well,
are. They just basically imagine who we are in the
yeah.
most negative light and attached ontological an ontological category to us, and we can't even imagine who we are. We can't even be who we want to be. We can't even make up our own identity. We're constrained by their ascriptions, and
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I
yeah,
can't disagree with you. You're absolutely right. And the minute, and notice, this is the thing that I always laugh at, man. I mean, you've been knowing me for a while, and I laugh because I'm like the person that goes and finds out the dirty secrets that are in the closet. And then when I bring them out, my answer is science, right? Like, we need scientific studies of black subjects, specifically black men. And, and people are so upset that I read books that it's frightening. You know what I mean?
yeah. But see, you know what? This is why I like what you're doing with black male studies, because
Mhm.
you already have the philosophical background and you already know the origin of a great way of the way white people think. Bottom line, I mean, that just gives you their ontology, and it gives you their epistemology, and it gives you their value theory, and also it gives you some sort of access, if you desire to get it, into the way that they think analytically, right?
Mhm.
So you say, okay, well, that's useful. So that's deductive thought, right? But then you say, look, there's this missing component. You're not looking at this, where really actually Hume is important, because you got matters of fact statements, and then you got these other kind of propositions, right? These deductive
Right.
kind of propositions. So you are like, look, let's marry. Look, I don't. You can think all day, you can theorize all day, but you got to match it up to the damn data. If you're not matching up your hypotheses and you're theorizing up to the data, what happens is you're not even approximating what's really happening on the ground. You're
These
here,
are all
you're up in the clouds like Plato. You're like studying the forms and you're playing games with people's lives, because this is what happens though. In the academy, you got knowledge production, and especially when you're talking about grievance studies like feminism or even race studies, right? If it's not tempered with what's actually happening in the real world, and you don't use these other disciplines or take an interdisciplinary approach, then you just get to theorize all day. Then you go get to talk on committees, and you get lobbyist groups, and they come together and they hear the proclamations of these people. Then all of a sudden, people who don't even understand what it is that's being proposed just run with it, and then it becomes part of policy. Like when it comes to domestic violence policy, or when it comes to policy related to rape or violence against women, they're not even taking into account what's actually happening and what's going on in other disciplines, especially disciplines that are more empirically based. So,
no, you're absolutely right.
so at the end of the
Absolutely.
day, you get entire policies taken up like by world organizations, international organizations that do nothing but reiterate the talking points of things that might match up to conventional wisdom, but they have no basis in science whatsoever. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So
Yes.
if we don't clean
This
this
is
up,
how
and I
most
think
Black philosophy operates.
if we don't clean this up, nobody's going to clean it up, man.
Hey, brother, look, I've had arguments, I mean, because you really have to think about this, brother. Like, I've been in philosophy. This is my 10th year, right? This is my 10th year in the discipline. And in that 10 years, I think out of all the papers I've given, I've had maybe one or two people actually respond to something I've said in the paper. Most of the time, people are quiet because they have no clue what I'm talking about. The other times they don't say anything because they just can't. And then the other third of the times they just go off railing some ideological something that has nothing to do with anything I said. So out of those three different responses that people could have to the work that I do, you can't move the needle. Like white feminists in philosophy are powerful enough to make sure that black men who question them can't get into disciplines, right? Can't get jobs. The black feminists in philosophy have enough partnerships with the white liberals in philosophy to make sure if they don't like you, you're not going to get jobs. And then the white people basically control everything. So if you piss off a white person by saying that all white people are racist, or that racism is permanent, or white philosophy is basically useless to deal with some of these questions, then you're not going to get the job. So I would never tell black people generally, but black men especially, to go into philosophy, right? I would say go into a more empirically geared field. But if you do go into philosophy, you have to know that that's the kind of cost, the kind of pushback that you're going to get, because none of the stuff we're saying is actually true on any probabilistic or objective level, right? It's not like most of the science and social science refutes most of the things that people are well known for in philosophy. But
right.
because philosophy is where you basically have a degree to make shit up, right? And people who have the most popular support for just making shit up are awfully the most renowned, and that's unfortunately a feature of the discipline. Which is why I'm actually pursuing empirical. I mean, I want the master of public health, and I think that after that, I'll pursue a few other degrees in the social science. But there's nothing in philosophy that can be gained on these issues, right? I mean, I think if you like language or logic or some cog sci stuff, I think there's a lot of rich areas of investigation. But if you're going to say you do social political thought or race, etc., then without these are all a posteriori observations of the world. So if you don't have any account of the world and nobody's holding you your feet to the fire in terms of what the science or what the actual conditions of the world are, then it's an inevitably rhetorical flourish. You're just making ideas sound.
It's relations of ideas, arguments just being recycled over and
Absolutely.
over and over and over. No matter of fact, propositions coming in to temper it at all. Just relations of ideas over and over and over again. This is why, look, I love philosophy, dude. Like, I'm not gonna lie, it caught my bug when I was an undergraduate. I was kind of, it happens to some people. Like, you read Plato or you read Aristotle and you read these other philosophers, and then you get a take on the world that you hadn't received, or that you think about things the way you haven't before. And so you say, man, well, maybe there's something here. But then when you become an expert at it, and you get more learned, or you become more accomplished in it, you realize, look, we're just recycling arguments that we don't have to prove at all. All we're doing is we don't have to prove them at all. We can just say whatever we want to say. We can make up a new thought and we never have to test it. When you're talking about black people and their lives, man, that's some bullshit, man. I'm just saying.
Hey, I understand. I mean, but look, you know where I stand on these arguments, right? Like, I think there's a lot of rich work to be done only if we have empirical or social scientific accounts to ground what we say. I think it's absolutely ridiculous that we have conversations in Black philosophy about domestic abuse and rape that intentionally and deliberately exclude Black men, right? Their organizations and different groups of philosophy will not put Black men on panels, despite Black men having some of the highest rates of 12-month prevalence of statutory rape, of made to penetrate violence in the United States, right? So so my question is, in any given year, if Black men report more rape, made to penetrate violence, sexual coercion than their female counterpart, why are there not panels for Black men to be to talk about these issues? Right, like that's an ideological point. The data has been around for 10 years at this point.
Well, right? You already know what the answer to this question is, and I talk about it on my channel all the time. For the most part, feminists have gained a political foothold in popular culture. I mean, bottom line, they have, and so basically they're. But the reason I think that's so is because for the most part in the Western world, people have bought in full scale, man. Like they've been enchanted by the women are wonderful effect. Like women can do no wrong. And I think that this is what's disingenuous about feminist philosophy to some degree. I mean, all they've done is take Marxism and like the placeholder theory that you mentioned earlier. They take women and put them into the position of the proletariat. They take men and put them into the position of the bourgeoisie. And then, all you need to know about how to deal with trying to attain justice or overthrow the system. I mean, patriarchy. Patriarchy is the placeholder for capitalism. Bottom line, and
that's exactly what McKinnon does. Like she has chapters on why Marxism doesn't work. We need to replace it with this dominance theory about women. Because in the 80s, you had a lot of women talking about Marxism and psychoanalysis as the way to understand how the concept of woman was both symbolically and economically kind of like etched into the psyches and the structure of patriarchal societies, right? Like I mean, the reason I actually enjoy reading some of these old white feminists because you really do see where all this stuff comes from. And I just laugh when people, because I think that one of the things that people like to say is like, oh, you're generalizing feminism or you're doing this. And then when you try to talk to them about any of these texts, they haven't read it. Right? They haven't read anything beyond bell hooks. But they'll read Hartman and all these people, but they haven't read anything past that.
But that's the fucked up thing. See, how can you proclaim to be an expert and to be politically orientated towards a certain point of view, a philosophical point of view, and you don't even know the origin of the point of view yourself?
It's not.
That's lazy as hell. It's intellectually lazy, right. And the protection is through association related to this. So it's like, okay, there's a number of people who think like I think, and so we're going to block you. So it's like a paradigm. All it is a paradigm or a discourse or a narrative, if you want to refer to the French or, the people in, continental. I mean, the whole idea is that there's a discourse there and people are able to make money off of it and they're able to advance their political agenda off of it. Bottom line.
Brother, everything, but I guess this is the way I look at stuff now. Like, I'm going to keep doing my work. I think Black male studies is picking up, right? Because there's new people every day. I get messages and scholars, citing the work and engaging it. The work comes from a place of caring about Black men and boys. It's not trying to create, right? Like you have these histories in Black feminism that are trying to create Black men as deviants and rapists, etc. Even though we know that Black women disproportionately rape and unharmed, young boys and Black men, that's not the agenda. The agenda is to deal with Black men as victims and understand their trauma. So that's a long way of saying that, things will change. Nothing lasts forever. And, in every generation, it may be long after I die or whatever, people come into history with certain kinds of ideas, even if they're unpopular, because that's what history demands at that time. So I don't think it's an accident that somehow I came up with Black male studies and I'm challenging these theories. That's just what I was supposed to do. That's my intellectual journey. And after I die and people go back and start looking at this moment more carefully and the politics don't make sense anymore, which they inevitably will, 50 to 100 years from now, people are going to say, look, this guy got it. This guy was already writing about what we're trying to answer now. But, the idea that we have to hate each other, the idea that we have to draw lines and boxes around our ideology as if that's somehow going to protect them from being evaluated by people and generations after we're gone is nonsense. It's actually speaks of a profound ignorance and misconceptualization or errant conceptualization of what the philosopher is supposed to do. I mean, these people are fighting for a certain kind of egoism and professional narcissism where everyone has to bow down to their work. I'm not interested in that. You don't have to, but you can argue with me all day and I'll still be cool with you. But you have to have facts. And the reality of the situation is the field right now is not at a point where it's seriously integrated science and the social sciences to an extent to be able to answer many of the things that I say. And that'll change in time. But as for right now, we're just not at the point that we can seriously deal with an empirically fleshed out theorization of black men and boys. We're just not there yet.
Yeah, well, hopefully we'll get there because I even wrote a paper on this. I'm not going to even talk about that because I'm being incognito as I do it. I'm the G with a PhD. I'm the green gorilla. You know what I'm saying? For now, not forever. Right. But I mean, the whole point to me is the greatest philosophers were not just philosophers. They weren't one-trick ponies, even in the Western tradition. So why is it that there's this narrow way of thinking, this canalized thought, this myopia, where you just got to do it this way, right? You can't do anything because all of those people in the other disciplines, they're supposed to be doing that kind of work. We don't have to entertain it. We can just operate on our own, in our own ivory, I won't say ivory tower, but in our own space, and we don't have to refer to any of that other work. I mean, the people who broke forth the field of philosophy in the way that it is now, I mean, like Descartes did work on optics. Immanuel Kant did work on anthropology. I mean, like these
and
people, they weren't one-trick ponies. You see what I'm saying?
But I understand. Those are white people. Black people have to get into discipline and be like, well, yes, sir. Miss saying, I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, right? yeah.
There's no innovation, man. Look, I remember when I first started at Texas A&M, my very first year. We had to do these annual reports. They gave me this guy that knew nothing about my field, was just overtly hostile to Africana. And he asked me how many articles I published. And I told him 13. And he's like, oh, that what you got hired with doesn't count. That's what you used to get the job. I was like, well, one, that's not true because my contract says everything counts. But two, I was like, I published an additional 13 articles this year. Like this year, for example, I published, I want to say 14 or 15 articles, right? I publish a lot. But this white man could not believe, right, that a black person would dare come in and say that they've published 13 articles. Because me publishing 30, you see, this is the trick. Me publishing 13 articles my first year had already surpassed the qualifications for tenure. Because the qualifications for tenure at A&M are only 6 to 10 articles, right? Maybe 6 to 8, really, when I was there, right? Because that's what all the white people were getting tenured on. But somehow, because I was black, I think I went up for tenure with 33 articles and like 5 chapters. I had over 30 publications, right? And a book contract. And the white people were still like, oh, well, we don't know if you'll get it, right? We think this is not a tenurable file. I was like, well, we're going to go, but this is the thing. For me to get through, I had to make a conscious decision not to listen to any of the white people that I was engaging with. Now, think about that, right? I got through, I went from assistant professor to full professor in 7 years. And I actually got a year off. But in 7 years, I went from assistant to full without taking any of the advice of the white people, right? Because the white people weren't interested in you being the best you could be. The white people were interested in protecting their own sensibilities and ego about how long it took for them to get tenure and full, right? It took them 6-7 years to get tenure. It took them another 10-12 years to get full, right? You get this black boy that comes in from SIU that's doing tenure, that's going from assistant to full in 6-7 years. Oh, like that, like what I was saying, I made a mockery of the system, right?
But dude, you just love this shit, man. You love it. This is what you like.
I don't know if it's a love thing. I'm unbothered by it because I already expect it, right? When I was in grad school, I finished my coursework in 1 year, right? So I had a master's at DePaul, came in to SIU, did all my courses in 1 year. It took an overload. I was taking like 12, 15 courses. Did it in 1 year, took some courses during the summer, and then when I did that, I asked to take the prelim. And the prelim was like, then was like this big test, right? I'm like, oh, well, you can't take the prelim. And, I remember he told me, even if you could take the prelim, I don't think you could pass it just being in the program for 1 year. So, me, I was like, well, I think we should find out. I was, my perspective is, you can't. I remember they were like, well, you can't finish a program in a year. Let's find out. I did that. You can't pass the prelim. It's 3,000 years. Let me take it. Let's find out. And I passed it, right? Like these are not objective things. These are not real things in the world, right? If a white person had finished a PhD a year, full in 7 years, and in their ninth year got a distinguished professorship or a chair, one of the best philosophy departments in the world, everybody would think that person was the best thing since sliced bread. You would see his or her name posted everywhere. The discipline would be so happy to claim this person as an exemplary feature of what their discipline could produce. But you put that person to be a little black boy, working class black boy from Lake Charles, Louisiana. And it's just like Baldwin says, right? You praise a white man who says, give me liberty or give me death. And you'll kill a nigga to say that because you think he's going to inspire other black people to do that. Right. And that's what's at contention here. That's what's at stake. You don't want a bunch of people who know now that you can go to a research one institution and get full in 6 or 7 years if you publish enough and build up a national reputation. You don't want black people believing that you can be endowed chair without having to simply bow down to the wishes of a white discipline. You don't want black people to believe they can have a career if they say things that white people don't like. That's what's at stake in all this. Because most of the people who have negative things about black male studies or me personally, I've never talked to. I've never talked to most of the people, even in black philosophy. Never had a conversation. So this is an ideological issue. This is a paradigmatic issue about what black people are allowed to be in the discipline. And as I said, it's not so much that I enjoy it. I certainly don't mind it. But we have this saying where I'm from, Louisiana, like you don't bend for white people. I just don't bend for white people, right? If you're uncomfortable with my presence or my accomplishments, that's just how you will be real uncomfortable. And once I find out you're uncomfortable, then I'm engaged with you more and make you more uncomfortable, right? But I'm not one of those people. I certainly don't think that I'm arrogant in the sense that I'm braggadocious, but I'm not one of those people that's gonna lessen myself because the idea is that white men or women should be at the forefront of how we think about a problem. And I think that we've had so many examples of black people that have given so much to the discipline and not been appreciated in life or in death. That's just not something that I'm interested in doing. And does that cost me jobs? I'm sure it has. Does it cost me awards or book awards? I'm sure it does. Does it mean people say things about me? Yeah, probably. But at the end of the day, I think I'm extremely successful. And I'm extremely prominent for the position that I'm in. So that's just how history's going to work out.
Hey man, you know what? Having said that, man, we reached the 2 hour mark. I do want to thank you, man, so much, man, for coming through. I really appreciate it when people who I know are willing to come in and drop a few lines on the Green Gorilla channel, man. I really appreciate it.
Not a
And
problem,
and look, I do want to at some point, if I could, bring you back on and have a discussion about your work on Josiah Royce because
absolutely.
yeah, because people, like they already, they're like caught on the man not, like the man not, man not, and they're not, paying the same amount of attention to what's going on with Josiah Royce and that work. So I want
Yeah,
to
but it's intellectual history. I mean, I think the man not's provocative, right? The man not's like it just kind of walked up to you and slapped you,
yeah,
and Josiah Royce comes with like, here's a library of things that we haven't read. Maybe we should start having a different conversation. So it's just part of our culture. But I think the Royce book is certainly rigorous in the same way the man not is, but it's just dealing with different stuff. It's dealing with questions of imperialism and relationship between the United States and British Anglo-Saxon idealism versus the stuff that I think is provocative, which is that a black man created a different way to look at things outside of feminism.
But I still want to, like, if I could, man, just tell me.
Absolutely.
Y'all want to get
Absolutely.
you back on, man, sometime in the near future, and we can go over your work on British imperialism and American uh, aspirations to be an imperial power. So
Absolutely.
so yeah, dog, that was, man, this was a great conversation, man. And look,
Appreciate you having me.
thank you all for all of the people out there who contributed and supported the channel. I want to thank all of y'all. I really appreciate it. And dude, man, you know, all I can say is, man, Godspeed to you, my brother.
Thank you,
And
sir. Thank you.
I'm gonna cut off. And thank y'all, man. Look, Green Gorilla Channel, we out of here, man. Peace.